Joining me this afternoon, Theo Userwood, political commentator. Have I painted a very bleak picture?
Good afternoon. It's a bleak, but it's an accurate picture, yes.
Well, I think so.
Everything is going up right across the board. Energy price cap up by £111.
Yeah.
Water bills up £10 a month. Most of your TV licences up £5. Car tax up £5. Everything is going to become more expensive to a tune, and it's always reckoned from their back of a fag packet maths to about £1,100 a month right across the board, and that's before you take into account, of course, the increase in national insurance contributions for employers as well. So,
and of course, when you dig into the detail, a lot of this doesn't really make much sense to me. So let's look at stamp duty, for example. So the threshold has dropped from 425 to 300,000. So therefore, people will face paying more, some £11,000 more. So I thought the idea was to get people onto the housing ladder, which that seems to fly in the face of that. But also, just in terms of, there are lots of older people who are living in houses which are far too big. They need to downsize, and of course there needs to be an incentive to do that, and it just seems to me the government is actually not doing that.
The last point you make is the more accurate point. I mean, I've seen the Telegraph have done a story, right, and they've lumped in stamp duty with road tax and council tax, and that's a bit of an anomaly, because actually stamp duty isn't the same as those other taxes because you can easily avoid it. You just don't move house, you don't sell up.
Yes.
But that of course has a knock-on effect on the surveyors who come around to survey, get the price. It has a knock-on effect on mortgage companies, that they want to lend money because they want to make money. Solicitors' fees, estate agents, they're no longer making money. We want to be encouraging, the government needs to be encouraging people to move house, because if they're doing that, then it's a whole wealth of sectors that benefit as a result.
So let's look at road tax. You mentioned it goes up by £5, but also in terms of electric cars, which I drive, of course, you've been exempt from road tax. That is changing, so it means you're going to pay £195 for the pleasure of driving on the roads. That makes sense to me because, of course, electric cars are heavier and tend to impart more damage to the roads. But also, this is the bit that I don't understand, they're also going to hit it with an expensive car premium of, say, £400.
Yeah.
Most electric cars tend to be quite expensive, so therefore they will be hit. I thought the whole point was to get people into electric cars.
Yes, but what happens is that, we've seen this previously, David, is that you create an incentive to buy an electric car, and by making it tax exempt, and then people buy electric cars, and then what the Treasury sees is it sees that everybody moves across, and suddenly they're hitting their tax revenues. So it looks like a great idea to start off with. It is a great idea to start off with, but then as people move across from diesel and petrol cars into electric cars, the tax revenue goes down. So inevitably, if you're thinking about getting an electric car, and I'm sure there's going to be, as the cars become more efficient and the tax exemptions, increase, but of course you end up in a situation where the Treasury loses out as people buy into technological innovation and progression, and so they have to inevitably tax that thing in the first.
No, I get all of that, but equally we don't have the energy infrastructure in this country. Of course, Mad Ed Miliband is desperate to put pylons all over the place, and of course you need to incentivise people to make that leap. Also, the government, if you remember, tried to get people to buy diesel cars. They're saying that actually the drivers of diesel cars will be hit with a £5,490 bill. So it seems to me that it's deeply unfair where government tries to incentivise you to do one thing and then comes after you later on in life and tries to clobber you with tax.
Yes, but that was always under Gordon Brown, wasn't he? That he was a big advocate for diesel cars. They were thought at the time to be more efficient. Lots of people went out and bought a diesel car, but then of course you've seen in London with ULEZ and the congestion charge, diesel cars now are out. You cannot drive. It is so punitively expensive now to drive a diesel car more than 10 years old. You simply don't do it, and therefore, I went and bought a new car not so recently, but I went and bought a new car, and people were really cottoning onto this up in northwest London. I went to one of those big out of town, well, not even out of town, but one of those big, and it was like a diesel car graveyard. It was literally rows and rows of mainly a lot of Volkswagens, but everybody was cottoning on to the fact that diesel cars were just so punitively expensive you couldn't buy them any longer, and of course that has a knock-on impact on the car industry as well. But the thing with electric, the crossover, and I've been weighing up getting a new car, do I go electric? They're fine if you just are going away for a day, or you're doing a day's errands. You can come back, charge it up, and you have a driveway. But if you don't have a driveway, and you've got to then put a cable out of your house to charge up the vehicle, that's another thing. But if you want to go, I had a friend who went up to Newcastle, came back from Newcastle in his electric car. It took 14 hours.
What?
Because he needed to charge up the battery.
Right.
So he got up to Newcastle.
But that goes back to my bigger point, which is actually if you spend the money, which is going to then get you your premium car tax, which is going to be applied to that vehicle. So mine does 300 miles before it needs a charge. So that's quite good. Also, the charging infrastructure for the particular car I drive is very good.
How long does it take you to charge your car?
Well, at a supercharger, about 30 minutes.
And then you get 100%?
I will get about 200 miles on that.
And do you have one near you where you live?
I do, but also I charge mine off solar panels because I don't want to pay the electricity prices. So all of
you're better than Martin.
But I was an early adopter. Well, I was an early adopter, so I did it at 8 years ago.
Save money with Dr. David Ball.
Well, you see, yes, Martin
clinic.
Lewis, I'll give you a run for your money. Let's also talk about council tax, of course, because we're seeing a reduction in services across the board. My rubbish never seems to be collected. Of course, the government is allowing them to increase by 4.99% without actually triggering a local referendum. They're all actually going up by 4.99%. Wait for this, I talked about this yesterday. Bradford, Labour-controlled, wanted nearly 15%. Hampshire wanted nearly 15%. Windsor and Maidenhead wanted 25%. They're not allowed to have that. They get 8.99% across the board. Yes. But it's a heck of a jump.
It's a heck of a jump, but it's worth recognising, of course, that within the government spending review, and this has been going back to austerities, you have protected departments. So the government will say, we're going to spend money on the NHS, we're going to spend money on the Department for Education, we're not going to cut those budgets. But that puts a huge amount of pressure on departments which do not see their budgets ring-fenced. One of the key ones is the Department for, and now it's called the Department of Communities and Local Government. That's Angela Rayner's department. Yeah. And that's seen their budget slashed because they're having to make up for the fact that other budgets have had their money ring-fenced, other departments have had their budgets ring-fenced, especially now defence. We're seeing, we've seen this promise to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027. Yeah. It only puts the pressure on transport, on justice, on the Home Office, or not all of the Home Office, but and on the Department for Housing as well. And that creates a huge amount of pressure because local government then have to cut their services, and therefore. And they have statutory services they have to provide, by the way, including children's care and adult social care. Yeah. So what they do inevitably...
That's the big one, adult social care.
Yeah, adult social care is huge, and also, children's social care as well. They have a legal obligation to provide those services. So what they do is they look to increase their council tax every single time, and they also look at other ways of raising revenue, aggressive parking attendants, parking wardens, for example, to ensure that they get the most money, they can extract the most money. And you've got another interesting story from the Spectator, by the way.
Well, I do.
Which feeds into this.
Well, so this is a really interesting article, and I was reading it. And essentially, let me just paraphrase it. So essentially what it says, say you're a young woman and you have a flat in London, okay, and you fall in love with a chap in Devon, okay, and you get married. So you just happen, because you've worked really hard, you have two properties, but your primary residence becomes Devon. So therefore, you pay your normal council tax on Devon. Now, what the government is allowing them to do is to double your council tax by 100% in your secondary residence. Now, the bit that doesn't make any sense to me is if we're saying that we want people back in work and we want people who are high up that chain in management terms to be back in the office, they need somewhere to live, say in London or in one of the big cities or in Birmingham, wherever. But what we're doing is we are actually punishing them for being back in the workplace, which is counterintuitive.
Yes, it doesn't... this is another way that they're giving more money-raising powers, tax-raising powers to local authorities under the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act of 2023. And of course, this kicks in this April. Councils are going to be able to make this charge. But you're quite right to say, we want people back in work. We want people spending money in the shops, going out for lunch breaks, getting their dry cleaning done. But this is only going to, in that scenario, incentivise people to say, you know what, I'm going to stay down and I'm going to sell up in London, stay down, work from home, and maybe just get a hotel which is punitively expensive, or a way of just coming out 1 day a week or 2 days a week.
So a typical annual council tax, say if it's 2,000, will go to £4,000 a year. But also, but the bit that I don't get is you're already paying council tax for another property. Also, you're not using the services because you're not in that property half the time, and you're paying the same amount as a family of 8 living next door. That doesn't seem fair.
No.
Which goes back actually to Margaret Thatcher and the community charge.
It's not fair, but they want to, they've had the counter-argument from the government's point of view is that they don't want people owning second homes. And so that they would make the argument...
A tax on aspiration.
Tax on aspiration, but they want to keep prices down. Their argument would be, when you keep the prices down in Devon, because you force people to have one property, they need to work in London, they can live in London.
Yeah.
And the couple where the chap has got the place in Devon would sell up in Devon and move to London. The property would be
into
available.
a one-bed? Say if you've got children, for example.
Well, I guess you'd have to sell the one-bed flat and then buy something slightly larger.
And as you say, then they stay at home, they don't go to work, and therefore that then is counterintuitive to what the government is trying to achieve in the first place.
Yes.
So it seems to me, and there is a running theme here, which is there is no joined-up thinking in government at all.
They're not. I think part of the problem with the government at the moment is that they are looking to tax to make the pip squeak, and what they're not thinking about is actually how can we support, and this has been the long-running criticism, David, how can we support economic growth? You know, the increase in stamp duty, fine, but we want people to sell their homes.
We do.
We want people to buy new homes, and if you're making it punitively expensive to get onto the housing ladder and to get up the housing ladder, and you're not that is not a good thing. And we know that if you can cut taxes in sensible and targeted ways, then it's perfectly possible that you can actually, get people trading, moving, and increase the tax revenue, because the economy is growing.
Loads of messages already coming in. Joanna in Salisbury says, "Hi David, moving house is ridiculously expensive. Stamp duty in and out, plus tax on equity gained, not to mention moving costs, and nothing fits. I have no reason to downsize again." And that proves the point I was trying to make.
Yes. No, but it's Joanna who's messaging. Joanna's messaging. Joanna probably recognises, listening now, and I hope I'm not putting words into her mouth, but that her house is probably too big. She doesn't need that. She doesn't need the extra couple of bedrooms, and actually that home would do really well for a family a growing family. But she's got why would she cut her nose off to spite her face by selling up and being hit with a tax bill?
And of course, on top of that, not only council tax, you've then got the corporation, the national employer contribution, which is going up. Of course, 300,000 businesses saying they're going to cut staff as a result of that.
85,000 jobs and that's from the Resolution Foundation.
Yes,
that's
and again, not
think
thought through. None of this is thought through.
Well, the government, the part of the problem the government has got themselves into is that they didn't listen, and had they consulted, David, or had they just floated the idea of increasing national insurance contributions for employers before the budget of last October, and listen to the likes of the chief executives of Asda or Tesco, or those who run the hospitality industry and employ large amounts of people, and dealing often with very fine profit margins. These are people who sell at scale, and it only takes a small hit to knock their profits out of whack completely. Then they would have got a message back that increasing national insurance contributions for employers would be a very bad move. We need, and I feel also sorry for the part-time employees.
So do
we
I.
live in a febrile economy at the moment, and we need employers to be saying, actually, you know what, you've worked for us for 6 months. We really like the look of you. Turned up on time. How about we give you a permanent job? And that would be something that for somebody on a minimum wage, national living wage, whatever it is, that would be a real. That would be a really good thing, because they would then have the certainty. But of course, Labour saying, well, we want to introduce the employment. You've got the employment rights coming down the track very soon, which is going to make it more expensive, or potentially make it more punitive to take on full-time staff. And it's just making it's not cogent what the government is doing. And they're advertising. Treasury's advertising for a business engagement lead I saw in one of the round robin emails this morning, and advertising it at £65,000 a year. They need to be getting in a real business leader who, put them on a really high salary so you can get the best person into the job, and start advising the Treasury on actually what businesses need and want in order to expand.
And also, just before we came on air, we were talking about the town hall bosses enjoying record salaries far higher than the Prime Minister. That sticks in your throat when you're being squeezed in every direction, whether it's your energy price cap or water bills or broadband or whatever. Then also the decimation of services, and they get an increase in salary. That can't be right.
You've got some of the bosses at the councils are running over £500,000 a year.
So Castle Point in Essex, this is Chris Mills, former strategic director of Castle Point, £565,000. Unacceptable.
But tell me a job that is more important than being Prime Minister.
Well,
a job that is more demanding than being Prime Minister. And I don't understand. There should be just you can still get the best people for £175,000 a year, or £172,000 the Prime Minister.
Well, I would have thought
and you have preferential conditions to the private sector.
Yes.
You have incredibly generous pension schemes compared to the private sector. OK, you're not going to have maybe the same bonus scheme that many of those firms, employees enjoy who work in the City of London. But it's a pretty good job, and you can attract good people without paying them extortionate amounts of money. And I don't understand. There needs to be. This is what your listeners. This is what the public hate. They see their services being cut on the one hand, and then they see bosses enjoying, £500,000 salaries on the other, and they're saying, well, hang on a moment, how many care workers would that? If let's say that Chris Mills, let's say he earned £175,000 a year. So he's being left with what, 325,000. How many? That's
a lot.
That's 8, 12. That's 13 care workers on 25 grand a year.
Yeah.
13 care workers.
Great maths. But you're right, you're absolutely right. And of course, at the same time, also, we're seeing all this illegal immigration coming in, and we'll show this later, a video of people showing their accommodation, which is being paid for by the taxpayer. £5.38 billion being spent on illegal migrants, and of course, 8,000 more in hotels than there were before Starmer came into power.
This is a problem that's not going to go away. I'll make a prediction now, and I know other people have made it, so I'm not saying anything particularly new, but if they don't get on top of this by the general election, I would, by the sort of the year going into the general election, so let's say Christmas 28, this is going to, the Labour government's going to reap a whirlwind on this particular issue.
I would agree.